And the second thing is that I wanted to see if you can give out like specific example of compensation and incentives, because I know we talked about obviously like a six-figure, like the monetary compensation is one part, but I don't know if you saw that tying your success to increase in revenue or different type of incentives and compensation for managerial roles. Do you see something that works better again for the entrepreneurs who's going to make their first time like big hire or managerial hire?
Sure. Yeah. So I would say that most often what we see in service-based businesses specifically is if they're divisionally responsible for something, their incentive compensation is tied to the gross margin associated with that division. And that becomes kind of a key component. So if they're running your remodel division, as an example, it would be, the revenue and then margin dollars produced out of that. And we are big advocates that it should be based on margin as opposed to top line revenue, because people can make interesting decisions to push revenue through that may ultimately either be short term in nature or negotiated in such a way that it's below your margin target, right? And therefore is, creating activity, but not necessarily profitability for the organization. So that's divisional. If you're hiring somebody in like a chief operating role, what tends to be a good way to think about it is how do you make sure that they're competitively compensated in a salary, but keep that in such a way that you can provide for meaningful incentive compensation tied to the growth of the organization. And so sometimes that is a percentage of the net income of the organization. Sometimes that's another target depending on what you're trying to optimize for the business for at that point in time. And it can also be a multi-year target. So you can have deferred compensation structures and some other things that, encourage them to help the team. So this is true, like even beyond a chief operating officer, if you have somebody who's responsible as like the head salesperson, who's also supposed to help all the other salespeople, when you have someone who's in that role, there can be a tendency for them to keep revenue that honestly should be delegated to somebody else, because if they're only incentivized off of their own book, it works against you, right? So tying deferred compensation measures to, kind of aggregate goals or team goals can be really helpful as well. So I don't have like a specific, this is exactly the percentage of each thing that you should do, because I think it depends on the scale of the business, the sophistication of who you're hiring, and your expectations on how the business should grow. But I think that anytime you're making a hire for somebody who is in a managerial role, if you're growing a business, you want to tie their compensation in some way to that growth, right? And you want them to have high conviction about that. So if they say, sorry, I want more base compensation and less of that incentive, I think that creates a very productive conversation around why is that the case? Do you not believe that we're capable of these things? Or do you think there's an impediment either around your skill set or our market potential that we should discuss before hiring you for this position? And I think that, it leads to, because there can be reasonable reasons sometimes why they want to hire base. And that may be based on market or specific life circumstances or whatever it may be. So sometimes it's valid, but it is an indication that if they're not in it to see the business grow, then you may have a challenge. And then the final piece is like, if you do intend to sell the business, there can be reasons why you put something in place around certain both scale achievements and then also, some sort of carrot around the business being sold, or at least doing a deal of some kind. And my caution on that is when you have a key employee, if that person is supposed to stay with the business, if they're provided with a big liquidity event that just sort of ends at the point of transaction, it creates instability in the relationship between the new owner and that individual, right? So it's something that you have to disclose to the potential buyer, number one, so that they're aware of it. But it's one of those things that you end up having lots of discussions about around, okay, so do we expect this person to stay or not now, right? What we tend to find can be a really good alternative to that is something by which there will be a carrot for them, but it potentially gives them the ability to roll that forward as equity in the new business or something along those lines. And again, that would be for like a chief operating officer or somebody who would normally buy into the business if they were going to be your partner long term. So there are a bunch of different ways to do it, but yeah, I would say incenting them on growth in some way and making sure that it's aligned with profitability and scaling profitability and not top line is the most important component.